host, Chase Mack, and this is the Advanced Podcast, aka AP. Today we will be discussing the psychological phenomenon known as dissociative amnesia and fugue. To help us understand this complex topic, we have expert psychologist Matthew Duvall. Hello, Matt.
Hi, Chase.
So, what is dissociative amnesia?
Dissociative amnesia is a form of dissociative disorder. Dissociative disorders are any variety of disorders that separate a person from some aspects of themselves or reality, greatly impairing any number of mental functions.
Matt, what are some examples of dissociative disorders?
There are a variety of forms of dissociative disorders, which is unfortunately an understudied area of mental health in psychology. Some forms include dissociative identity disorder, also known as DID, or, inaccurately in Pop Psych, as multiple personality disorder, probably the most famous and the most controversial, due to its possible non-existence and misuse in popular culture, such as the film Split. Dissociative depersonalization, which is the separation of a person from themselves, essentially leaving you living in the third person. Dissociative derealization, which is the separation of a person from the reality of their surroundings and those around them, leaving you in a mental fog. And dissociative amnesia, or in its more intense form, dissociative fugue, which is the subject of our discussion today and is the separation of the self from key memories.
And what can cause these dissociative disorders to form? Is it biological, environmental, or some combination of the two?
It is, like most things in psychology, a combination of the two. There have been findings which show signs that dissociative disorders, such as amnesia and fugue, are rooted somewhat biologically. Close relatives, for instance, are more likely to develop amnesia if their relative has as well. On the other hand, there have been some cases where there was no medical, familial, or personal history of dissociative disorders, and they still formed, making it hard to form a perfect biological link. Overall, dissociative disorders, with our somewhat limited understanding of them, appear to be largely environmental.
Well, what environmental factors can cause these disorders to form them?
Most commonly, traumatic events can cause these disorders to form. Either being a part of or even just witnessing traumatic events can be the immediate cause of a variety of dissociative disorders. Depersonalization, for instance, is far more likely to form in children who have experienced trauma and thus forms as a coping mechanism, a way for them to escape being in the traumatic situation. Wars and natural disaster are also periods of time when there's a much larger occurrence of dissociative disorders overall. High levels of stress are also a relatively common cause of these disorders, so even if you're not in a traumatic event, you can still develop them.
So, you just need to avoid stress and trauma, and you should be all set, right?
Basically.
So, Matt, can you expand on what dissociative amnesia is?
Absolutely. Dissociative amnesia is the separation of oneself from certain memories, like important personal information such as your name, or those are memories of especially traumatic experience of one's life.
What differentiates dissociative amnesia from medical or your average amnesia? What makes it dissociative?
Well, dissociative amnesia must not be occurring alongside any medically explainable reason for the disorder. Pretty much it has to be purely mental, not a physical ailment. Dissociative amnesia also cannot be alongside substance abuse, and medical amnesia is usually a lot more concerning to the individual, while dissociative amnesia can leave you pretty unfazed by the event.
Very intriguing. And what separates dissociative amnesia from dissociative fugue?
Dissociative fugue is essentially a far more intense form of dissociative amnesia. They're both dissociative disorders, and they're both focused on memory. Fugue is unique in two ways, though. One of these ways is the depth of the memory lost. Fugue is essentially the loss of your entire memory. You forget your entire personality, your entire life, every event you've lived through. This is thus a far more intense disorder and one with far more ramifications. The other factor that makes dissociative fugue unique from amnesia is fugue almost always includes lost wanderings or traveling. People will travel miles away from their home and begin new lives with no memory of who they are or where they came from.
Wow, that's insane. Do you have an example of this intense occurrence by any chance?
I do, in fact. This is an excerpt taken from the Cleveland Clinic. One middle manager was passed over for a promotion. He did not come home from work and was reported missing by his family. He was found a week later, 600 miles away, living under a different name, working as a short-order cook. When found by the police, he could not recognize any family member, friend, or coworker. He could not say who he was or explain his lack of identification.
That is a truly insane story. How common of an occurrence are disorders like this?
They're relatively rare, occurring in only about 1% of men and 2.6% of women.
And what is the treatment for this?
Well, we don't have a set treatment. There's a number of different methods that have proven somewhat effective. Psychotherapy, for instance, and cognitive behavioral therapy are somewhat effective, and hypnosis and drug-induced talk therapy can help to bring back lost memories. However, the majority of cases usually just end in spontaneous remission, with dissociative amnesia usually lasting only a matter of minutes to, in a longer period, days, or in extreme cases, weeks. And fugue is usually a bit longer, lasting somewhere between hours and months. It's usually treating the side effects of these disorders or dealing with the events that actually cause them in the first place that take priority. And these disorders are usually more symptoms than the actual diseases themselves.
Are there any known side effects to these disorders?
Not exactly. There aren't a ton of outright side effects, but these disorders can cause things like self-harm or suicide due to the intensities of these events or the impairing effects of the disorders, and not to mention the stress that the people are under to begin with.
Well, that about concludes our showing for today. Thank you, Matt, for coming on to this podcast.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here and informing your audience of dissociative amnesia.
This has been the Advanced Podcast.